Hello, my name is Lauren Talafero, and as part of Dr. Zoval's Chem 108 class, I will be using this video hopefully to help teach you how to name covalent compounds. Covalent compounds are nonmetals that share electrons to form molecules or polyatomic ions. Covalent compounds are made up of two nonmetals, and this is very important to remember when you're learning how to name compounds, because you may come across compounds that have a nonmetal and a metal, and in that case you're looking at an ionic compound, and the way that you'll name those is very different than this way, so just keep that in mind before you begin on your problems. Now in this video I have two objectives as far as naming covalent compounds go. I'd like to first help you to understand how to name the covalent compound when looking at the molecular formula, and I would also like to have you know how to take the molecular formula, turn it into the name, and vice versa. That way, whatever you run into, you'll be able to name it, you'll be able to write the formula, and you shouldn't have any problem with these once you have some practice. They're not too hard once you see the pattern that exists. Now to begin, we'll use an example. We use dinitrogen trioxide. Now when you hear that, it may sound somewhat familiar. You may hear the word nitrogen and you may hear something that sounds like oxygen. And in this case, that is correct. We're dealing with nitrogen and oxygen. But when we modify those words using the rules that are involved in covalent compounds, we get these added parts, and they're called prefixes. For covalent compounds, we use something called Greek prefixes. And you can see here in the chart that there are 10 of them. This is how we indicate how many of the element we have in the compound. So in dinitrogen trioxide, we have 2 nitrogens and we have 3 oxygens. Now when you see that word oxide, it sounds something like oxygen, but it's been modified, right? There's an IDE on the end. This is what we do in covalent compound naming. On the last part of the compound, the second piece, we take off the last part of that name and we add IDE. So when we're looking at this example, dinitrogen trioxide, we have 2 nitrogens and 3 oxygens. We put the IDE on the end of that, and now we have our name. Now when we write that in the molecular formula, we'll put an N for nitrogen, and we'll put a 2 as the subscript because we have 2 of them. And for oxygen, we have 3, of course, trioxide. So we'll put an O, the symbol for oxygen, and a 3 as the subscript. And that is both the molecular formula as well as the name of the compound. Now let's try another example, something that a lot of us might be familiar with, carbon dioxide. Of course, this is what we breathe out of our lungs once the gas exchange happens in the capillary beds of our lungs, and we breathe out carbon dioxide, and the formula for that is CO2. Now when we're starting with the molecular formula, we have to look at what we have so that we can start writing something down for the name. We see that there's a C, and of course that's carbon. Now we can assume that there's only one carbon because there's no subscript, and when you don't see a subscript, we'll assume that it's 1. We can see that there is a 2 as a subscript for oxygen, so that's going to be carbon dioxide. Don't forget the IDE that you put on the end of the oxygen in this case because it is the second piece. Now some of you may wonder, you say, I mentioned that there were these Greek prefixes and there's only 1 carbon, so should we put mono carbon dioxide? No, we don't put mono in front of the first piece. We just assume that it's 1 because there is no prefix. The second and last special case that we have to remember when naming covalent compounds comes into play when our second element begins with a vowel like O or A. In the example of carbon monoxide, we have 1 carbon and 1 oxygen in the compound. However, when we go to add the mono in front of the oxide portion of the name, we're going to remove one of the O's. We don't want to be left with carbon monoxide. Remove one of the O's and you're left with carbon monoxide, which is the proper name. This would also apply in cases where there is an A in the front of the second element as well. Now that you've learned these special cases, as well as the regular rules for naming covalent compounds, you should be able to easily name any covalent compound that you come across. Thanks for watching and have a good day.